Welcome to your deep dive into those awkward moments we all know too well.
Oh, yeah.
Ever had that feeling of like your brain just going blank when you need it most?
Oh, all the time.
Today we're looking into how to handle those cringe-worthy encounters with a bit more grace and maybe even a touch of humor.
Right.
Specifically, we're unpacking an episode of English Pod called An Embarrassing Situation
Okay.
to see how to smoothly handle forgetting someone's name.
It's interesting how those everyday anxieties persist, even as communication technology, evolves.
Right.
Yeah.
So in this English pod scenario, we meet Nick and Anna, who met at a conference the week before.
Okay.
They bump into each other, but Nick's in a bit of a hurry.
Uh-huh.
This phrase caught my attention.
Yeah.
It seems like it sets a specific tone.
It does. It does. In a bit of a hurry, conveys a sense of urgency without being rude, which is crucial in this kind of situation. It acknowledges the time constraint while still leaving space for a brief interaction.
I see. So he's not completely brushing her off. And then comes the awkward moment. Nick can't remember her name. He says, "Your name has just slipped my mind."
Oh, no.
I have to admit, I hear that phrase. It's like imagining a name on a slippery slope.
That imagery is precisely why it works. Slipped my mind uses a lighthearted idiom to soften the flow of admitting you've forgotten something.
Uh-huh.
It shifts the focus away from your lapse in memory and keeps the tone casual.
It's definitely less harsh than just blurting out, "I forgot your name."
Right.
So how does Anna respond? She says, "I'm terrible with names too." Could you tell me more about this terrible with phrase and how it's used in the podcast?
Sure, terrible with is a versatile phrase for expressing a common weakness in a self-deprecating way.
Mm-hmm.
The podcast gives examples like terrible with numbers, directions, or even faces.
Oh, wow.
It's relatable and instantly builds rapport, as if to say, hey, we all have our shortcomings.
It makes you wonder, what are some things you might say you're terrible with? It could be anything from remembering birthdays to folding fitted sheets. It's a fun way to connect over shared imperfections.
Right.
It's almost like an invitation for the other person to chime in with their own terrible with confession.
Exactly. It creates that instant connection through shared vulnerability.
Right.
And in this case, it allows Anna to quickly move past the awkwardness of Nick forgetting her name.
Now, this episode also highlights a few other useful phrases, almost like fluency boosters, to help us navigate these situations.
Okay.
Anna starts with a casual, "How's it going?" a classic greeting, but I'm curious, how does this contribute to a smoother interaction?
Well, how's it going acts as a social lubricant.
Okay.
It's a natural, informal way to open the conversation
Uh-huh.
and encourages a response, keeping the interaction flowing.
Mm-hmm.
It shifts the focus away from the awkward moment and creates a more relaxed atmosphere.
So it's not just about the words themselves, but also the overall tone and flow of the conversation?
Right.
I did notice that the English pod host, Marco, shares a personal anecdote about forgetting his uncle's name at a family reunion.
Uh-huh.
Does that play into this idea of smoother interaction too?
Absolutely. Marco's anecdote highlights the universality of these situations.
Okay,
It normalizes forgetting names and reminds us that it happens to everyone,
right.
even in seemingly high-pressure situations like family gatherings.
Yeah.
By sharing his own experience, Marco creates a sense of camaraderie and makes the listener feel less alone in their awkward moments.
That makes sense. It takes the pressure off, reminding us that these things happen.
Yeah.
But let's say you do find yourself blanking on a name. Are there any strategies from the podcast that you found particularly useful for handling this gracefully?
The podcast suggests some clever tactics like asking for a business card or requesting their email address.
Oh,
It's a subtle way to get their name without explicitly admitting you've forgotten it.
right.
These strategies demonstrate social intelligence and quick thinking, allowing you to navigate potentially embarrassing moments with finesse.
I like that. It
Yeah.
feels more natural than just saying, "Remind me of your name again."
Exactly.
And speaking of subtly gathering information, the phrase contact details comes up.
Right.
I'm curious, is there more to that phrase than just a phone number or email address?
Contact details implies more than just a way to reach someone.
Okay.
It suggests a desire for future connection.
Oh,
Think of it like a thread extending between two people, a pathway for future interaction.
that's a great way to put it. It elevates the concept beyond just a transactional exchange of information.
Exactly. And it reinforces the idea that even in fleeting interactions,
Mm-hmm.
establishing a connection, however brief, can be valuable.
Right.
It's about acknowledging the person and expressing a willingness to engage beyond the immediate moment.
This has been a fascinating look at how even the simplest phrases can have a huge impact on how we navigate awkward situations.
Right.
Before we move on to some more examples, let's pause here and let our listener absorb these insights.
Sounds good. It's fascinating how those seemingly small moments of connection can really shape our perception of others.
Mm-hmm.
Even if we fumble a bit,
Right.
showing a genuine interest in connecting can leave a positive impression.
You've touched on how even a simple phrase like contact details hints at wanting to connect further.
Right.
Would you say it's almost like a social contract of sorts?
I think that's a great way to look at it.
Okay.
Exchanging contact details is like saying, I'm open to continuing this conversation, to building a relationship.
Uh-huh.
It goes beyond just the practical aspect of communication and becomes a symbol of potential connection.
That reminds me of something you mentioned earlier about the English pod host, Marco, sharing that anecdote about forgetting his uncle's name.
Yeah,
It seems like vulnerability can play a big part in smoothing over these awkward moments.
absolutely. By sharing that story,
Yeah.
Marco creates a sense of shared experience, reminding listeners that we all make these kinds of social blunders.
Mm-hmm.
It humanizes him and makes his advice more relatable and impactful.
It's like he's saying, hey, I've been there too, and it's okay to laugh at ourselves sometimes.
Exactly.
That kind of vulnerability can really disarm a situation and make it feel less awkward.
It breaks down those social barriers and allows for genuine connection.
Right.
Instead of pretending to be perfect, we acknowledge our imperfections and invite others to do the same.
So going back to the idea of names and memory,
Okay.
why do you think we forget names so easily, even if we've met someone before? Is there something about names specifically that makes them tricky to remember?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
There's actually a psychological explanation for this.
Okay.
Names are often arbitrary pieces of information
Uh-huh.
that aren't directly linked to any other details about a person.
Okay.
Unlike, say, their profession or hobbies,
Right.
names don't usually tell us anything about who they are or what they do.
So it's almost like our brains prioritize other types of information over names.
Yes.
We might remember that someone is a doctor or a musician before we remember their name because those details give us more context.
Precisely. Our brains are constantly filtering information,
Right.
and names unfortunately often get relegated to the back burner. But there are techniques we can use to improve our name recall.
Okay.
For instance, actively repeating someone's name when you first meet them can help solidify it in your memory.
That makes sense. It's like creating a stronger neural pathway by repeating the information.
Uh-huh.
It reminds me of those memory tricks where you associate a name with a visual image to make it more memorable.
Exactly. Those techniques tap into the power of association and visualization, making the information stick better.
Right.
And even if you do forget someone's name, don't beat yourself up about it.
Okay.
Remember, it happens to the best of us.
It's all about how we handle those moments, right?
Yes.
So let's say you've tried those subtle strategies for getting someone's name without directly asking,
Right.
but they just don't seem to be working.
Okay.
What would be your advice for that situation?
In those cases, honesty is often the best policy.
Okay.
You can simply say something like, I'm so sorry, but your name has escaped me for the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Would you mind reminding me?
Yeah.
Most people are understanding and won't take offense,
Right.
especially if you approach the situation with sincerity.
It's better to admit you've forgotten than to stumble through the conversation awkwardly trying to avoid saying their name.
Absolutely. And it actually opens the door for a moment of connection.
Mm-hmm.
You can even turn it into a lighthearted exchange by saying something like, I have a terrible memory for names.
Right.
Please forgive me.
That self-deprecating humor goes a long way in diffusing any awkwardness.
It does.
It shows you're comfortable enough to laugh at yourself, which can put the other person at ease as well.
Exactly. It's about embracing those moments of imperfection
Right.
and using them to foster connection rather than letting them become a source of embarrassment.
This deep dive has really shed light on the subtle nuances of navigating those awkward social encounters.
It has.
It's amazing how even the simplest phrases can make a big difference in how we handle those moments.
It's all about using language strategically to create a sense of ease and connection,
Right.
even when we find ourselves in potentially embarrassing situations.
We've covered some great tips and insights, and I want to make sure our listener has a chance to absorb all of this before we move on to the final takeaways.
Okay.
So before we wrap up, let's
Yeah.
revisit some of those key phrases that can help you navigate those awkward moments with grace and humor.
Absolutely. We talked about in a bit of a hurry
Mm-hmm.
as a polite way to acknowledge a time constraint,
Right.
slipped my mind,
Yeah.
as a lighthearted way to address forgetting something,
Mm-hmm.
and credible with as a relatable way to express a common weakness
Right.
and connect with others.
And we explored how contact details
Yeah,
implies a desire for future connection,
exactly.
going beyond a simple exchange of information.
It's amazing how much meaning can be packed into these everyday phrases.
Right.
They're not just words, but tools for building rapport, navigating tricky situations,
Mm-hmm.
and ultimately strengthening connections.
Exactly. And it all comes back to that core idea of human connection.
Right.
Even in those fleeting moments of awkwardness,
Yeah.
there's an opportunity to create a sense of shared experience
Uh-huh.
and maybe even have a laugh along the way.
I'd like to leave you with a thought to consider.
Okay.
What other social situations make you feel flustered?
Mm-hmm.
Think about the language you could use to handle those moments with a bit more confidence and ease.
Right.
Perhaps there are phrases you already use
Yeah.
without even realizing their power.
It's like having a secret decoder ring for social
It
interactions.
is.
By understanding the nuances of language, we can unlock smoother conversations and build more meaningful connections.
And remember, it's okay to be terrible with something.
Right.
Those imperfections are what make us human and create opportunities for genuine connection.
Beautifully said. So embrace those awkward moments, find the humor in them,
Yeah.
and keep those conversations flowing.